U.S. President Donald Trump says that talks over a ceasefire in Gaza are, quote, going along very well. He met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over dinner at the White House on Monday. On the table for discussion were new U.S. talks with Iran and the future of Gaza. Netanyahu said that the U.S. and Israel are working with countries, who would give Palestinians, quote, a better future. Meanwhile, the White House says that Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, will travel to Qatar this week, where Israel and Hamas are involved in ceasefire negotiations. Gabriel Mitchell is a visiting fellow with the German Marshall Fund who joined us from Jerusalem, and I asked him what he made of the President Trump's answer of "I don't know" when asked about a possible two-state solution. Let's get more on that. Let's bring in Gabriel Mitchell. He is a visiting fellow with the German Marshall Fund. He's joining us from Jerusalem now. So this is Netanyahu's third visit to Washington since Trump returned to power. What do you make of what he has been saying in Washington?
Well, essentially, his communication has been that Israel is interested in reaching some kind of end to the war. At the same time, it wants it on its own terms. And that's part of the reason why there was no large press conference between Netanyahu and Trump. I think they're still very much in the process of negotiations, trying to understand how the U.S. and Israel can align for the day after in Gaza.
Trump, meantime, has been pressing the Israeli prime minister to end the devastating Gaza war as Israel and Hamas round out a second day of indirect talks in Qatar on a potential ceasefire that has so far been so elusive. How do you see Trump's leverage in getting a deal done?
After the attacks on Iran, Trump has tremendous leverage upon actors in the Middle East, including Qatar, to get a deal and to pressure Hamas into reaching, at the very least, a temporary ceasefire and negotiating the end to the conflict. It doesn't mean that the United States can deliver, and I think that there are a lot of details that the Trump administration is going to have to rely on its mediators and its negotiating team to finalize and coordinate along with the Israelis. But I think that the events that took place in the month of June between Israel and Iran gave the United States more leverage than it had in the past.
And how about his leverage with the Israelis? Because, Trump said, quote, "I don't know," when he was asked by reporters if a so-called two-state solution was possible. And he referred that question actually to Netanyahu. What do you make of this dynamic?
Trump has always taken the approach that allies should dictate what they want, and the United States will deliver at the final mark, at the final yard line. And so I think in some ways, Trump may have some kind of vision, but he wants the Israeli prime minister to articulate it. He understands, as do all Israelis, that Netanyahu is between a rock and a hard place. He is pressured by members within his coalition to continue fighting and to ensure that the Israeli military stays in Gaza. Yet at the same time, he's being pressured by the administration to reach an end to the war. And so Trump wants Netanyahu to say it. Right now, Netanyahu is saying a little bit of both. He wants some kind of self-governance for Palestinians, but he's not willing to articulate what that looks like.
We all heard the international blowback, including, from the legal community when Trump announced his plans for Gaza. We have Netanyahu and Trump now saying that they are close to finding countries to take in Gazans who are willing to leave. Tell us a little bit more about how that is unfolding.
Well, there's a lot of questions that we don't quite know the answers to. When we talk about Gazans leaving, is it a temporary leave? Will they be allowed back in? Who are the countries that, at least in theory, would be willing to take them on? The countries in the region would be under tremendous political pressure not to accept Palestinian refugees from their own domestic populations who would see it as surrendering to Israeli and American wishes. Are there Western countries that would be willing to take on Palestinian refugees? And if so, under what current terms and conditions? So I think that there are a lot of questions that we don't still know have the answers to. And we also don't know what percentage of Palestinians either A, would like to leave the Gaza Strip, and B, would be allowed to leave the Gaza Strip.
German Marshall Fund visiting fellow Gabriel Mitchell, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's get more. I'm joined by DW correspondent Tanya Kramer. She has the view from Jerusalem. So, Tanya, Netanyahu and Trump, they're talking in Washington about, a possible way to end this conflict. Tell us a little bit more about the plans that are on the table.
Well, right now, what is being publicly discussed is one thing. What is going on behind the scene is another. Obviously, we're having right now these two tracks. We're seeing this visit by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Washington. On the other hand, there are those indirect proximity talks in Qatar, in Doha, between Hamas and Israel. And of course, the mediators trying to hammer out a ceasefire and hostage release deal. And, we don't know at the moment where those talks stand. We get really very conflicting reports from there. What basically are still the sticking points. Some of them we know. It's about the withdrawal of Israeli forces. It's about the aid distribution. There's a lot of talk about the controversial Gaza humanitarian foundation, whether they still play a role. And of course, about the key demand by Hamas for an end, a permanent end to the war. All in all, there should be a 60-day ceasefire and a partial, which is from the point of view of Israel, more of a temporary plan or a ceasefire to release half of the living hostages and 18 of those that are deceased. Now, there are a lot of, there's a lot of discussion here, but what's very interesting, while this is being discussed, there has been a new plan that has been proposed by Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz. He called it a bit of a misleading term, a humanitarian city that should be erected on the ruins of Rafah. That's the southernmost city, or was the southernmost city in the Gaza Strip. Where he wants to see most of the population being transferred to, where they should be living. A tent city should be erected there, and where Hamas has no role to play in this area. So that would be an area basically where you would see Israeli troops holding the Philadelphia corridor, which is the border area between Egypt and Gaza, and this newly built Morak corridor, which is this corridor basically between Khan Yunis and Rafah, so it would be encircled. Now, what we also understand from these plans is that people would go in, but they would not be able then to go out. We don't know much more details about that, but some voices here have even suggested that is the first stage then of getting some people out there. So another topic that's being discussed in Israel is that a lot of people from relatives of the hostages, but in general the public, is very critical of this partial deal because it would also include that there has to be a choice made who of those about 20 living hostages would be released. And that is a very, very difficult choice to make. There's a lot of criticism leveled at the government why they would even go for such a partial and temporary ceasefire.
Okay, so that's the situation with regard to Gaza and what is going on. But tell us a little bit more, Tanya, about how these two leaders are likely going to be discussing Iran and what they've been saying.
Absolutely, it's another a big topic for them. Of course, in Israel, the government, there's a sense it was a very successful operation attacking Iran, and then with the help of the United States. So for the time being, we understand there are only verbal agreements. We heard, however, President Trump saying that there might be some meetings scheduled also when it comes to Iran's nuclear program. But we also heard from Israeli officials that they want to keep their freedom of movement, like in Iran's airspace, that they want to get the green light from the US to occasionally fly over Iran, or if they're very concerned about Iran revamping their ballistic missile program to possibly even bomb Iran. So that's a very controversial plan, but that goes also in line with other topics that are being discussed as the Abraham Accords. This was a series of normalization agreements that were dealt with under the first Trump administration in 2020 between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. So there's also a lot of talk about some developments there. But at the moment, all of this is, of course, these are their own topics, but this is all connected as well, obviously, to progress in Gaza.
DW correspondent Tanya Kramer in Jerusalem. Thank you.